Have you ever wondered what makes a champion unstoppable? What's the secret behind Michael Jordan's legendary success? We all dream of success, but when life knocks us down, most people give up. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, was once a young man who was told he wasn't good enough. His story is proof that rejection doesn't define us, our mindset does. Picture a teenage Michael Jordan, standing in the school gym, staring at the list of names pinned to the wall. His heart sank. He didn't make the varsity basketball team. The sting of rejection cut deep. For most people, that moment would have been the end. But for Michael, it was a spark. He went home that day, locked himself in his room, and cried. But those tears soon turned into fire. He practiced relentlessly, morning to night, while others slept. Every missed shot became fuel. Every failure became a lesson. Years later, the world would know his name. 6 NBA championships, 5 MVPs, an icon of resilience. But what truly made Michael Jordan unstoppable wasn't just his talent. It was his mindset, to never let failure break him, but to let it shape him. His journey teaches us this. Success isn't about never falling. It's about never staying down. The gymnasium was alive with echoes that afternoon, the kind of echoes that live in memory long after the moment has passed. The polished wooden floor shone under fluorescent lights, reflecting the restless energy of dozens of teenage boys. Sneakers squeaked, laughter burst out in waves, and the air carried a distinct mix of sweat, chalk, and nervous anticipation. This wasn't just a gym. Today, it was an arena of dreams. Michael Jordan walked in, shoulders square but heart pounding, each step heavy with unspoken hope. At 15 years old, he was still raw, tall but not tall enough, talented but not yet refined, a boy in a sea of boys all desperate for the same thing. His eyes darted toward the bulletin board at the far end of the gym, where a white sheet of paper hung, trembling slightly under the weight of its own importance. That piece of paper would separate the chosen from the forgotten. It held names, dreams printed in black ink. A group of boys clustered around it, their voices overlapping in shouts and gasps. Some cheered, others cursed under their breath, and a few just stood in stunned silence. Michael slowed his pace, his chest tightening as if the air itself had turned against him. He had been waiting for this day for weeks. Every layup, every jump shot, every sprint in practice building toward this single moment. He pushed gently into the crowd, his sneakers whispering against the floor. The list stared back at him, stark and unyielding. His eyes scanned quickly, too quickly, as the speed would force his name to appear. Anderson, Bailey, Cook, Davis, he paused. His breath caught. No Jordan. He blinked hard, forcing his eyes to slow down, dragging his finger along the lines of typewritten names. Once more, twice more. Each time, the truth cut deeper. His name wasn't there. For a second, the world fell silent. The shouts and laughter around him blurred into nothing, muffled like the sound of water filling his ears. He felt the blood rush to his face, his throat tightening with something too heavy to swallow. Someone slapped another boy on the back beside him, celebrating, their voices loud and sharp. Michael turned away quickly, before anyone could see the storm rising in his eyes. He walked fast, almost stumbling as he pushed through the double doors. The hallway outside felt colder, lonelier. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cruel and indifferent. He kept his head down, each step echoing against the tiles. His hands clenched and unclenched, his chest rising with shallow breaths. It wasn't just disappointment. It was humiliation, rejection biting at his skin like frost. By the time he reached home, the mask had cracked. He slammed his bedroom door shut, ignoring his mother's soft call from the kitchen. The walls of his room seemed smaller, tighter, as though they were closing in on him. Posters of basketball legends stared down at him. Dr. J soaring through the air, Magic Johnson smiling with a trophy in hand. Their images mocked him in that moment. He collapsed onto the bed, burying his face in the pillow. The tears came fast, hot and uncontrollable. At 15, he felt broken. How could they not see what he saw in himself? How could his best not be good enough? He thought about every drill, every hour he had stayed late after practice, the sweat and the bruises. None of it had been enough to earn a spot on that list. and the thought cut deeper than any physical wound. Maybe I'm not meant for this. Minutes stretched into an hour. The light outside his window shifted from afternoon gold to evening gray. His tears slowed, leaving behind a dull ache in his chest. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of his family moving about in the rest of the house. Life outside went on, indifferent to his heartbreak. But somewhere inside him, beneath the pain, beneath the sting of rejection, a spark flickered, a voice small but steady. His father's voice echoed in memory. "Don't quit, Mike. You don't stop when it's hard. You stop when it's done." He remembered his mother's gentle words on nights when he had struggled. "Crying is fine, but don't you dare let it end here." He sat up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. His eyes were red, but there was something new in them now. Something sharper, hungrier. He looked toward the corner of his room, where his basketball rested against the wall. The orange leather caught the dim light. Waiting, he stood, walked over, and picked it up. His fingers gripped it tighter than ever before. In that moment, Michael Jordan made a silent vow. He would never feel this pain again. Not because he would avoid failure, but because he would outwork everyone until failure had no choice but to bow before him. They might not have seen his name on the list today, but one day, the world would not be able to forget it. That night, while the neighborhood grew quiet and the stars blinked awake, Michael slipped outside. The air was cold, crisp enough to sting his skin, but he welcomed it, under the faint glow of the streetlight. He set up in his driveway, the hoop standing tall like a challenge. He dribbled once, twice, then shot. The ball clanged against the rim, bouncing away. He chased it down, dribbled again, shot again. Mississippi, Mississippi make. Mississippi make. Over and over, the rhythm of the ball striking the concrete filled the night. His body ached, his arms heavy, but he refused to stop. Each miss whispered not enough in his ear. Each make whispered closer. He stayed there long after most kids would have quit, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, his determination burning hotter with every shot. Inside his chest, rejection still throbbed like a fresh wound. But with every release of the ball, he was building something new, discipline, grit, and unbreakable fire. One day, this pain would become his weapon. One day, this moment, the cut that was meant to break him, would be remembered as the rejection that started it all. The house was alive with the ordinary sounds of evening, the clinking of dishes in the kitchen, the faint hum of a television in the living room, the muted chatter of siblings moving about. To the rest of the Jordan household, it was just another day. But behind a closed bedroom door upstairs, the world felt shattered. Michael lay face down on his bed, the muffled fabric of the pillow soaking up his tears. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, each sob cutting into him like a knife. He tried to quiet them, afraid someone might hear, but the pain was too raw to hold back. His fists pounded once against the mattress, a silent cry of frustration. It wasn't just about basketball. It was about identity, about being told in the bluntest way possible that he wasn't good enough. For a boy who had always believed in his own potential, the absence of his name on that list felt like the world mocking him. He could still see the paper in his mind, the neat lines of names that belonged to others, not him. It burned in his memory like a scar, taunting him every time he blinked. The doorknob rattled once. His mother's soft voice called through the wood. "Michael, dinner's almost ready." He didn't answer. He couldn't. If he opened his mouth, the pain would pour out again. She waited for a moment, then walked away, her footsteps fading down the hall. Silence returned. Michael rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. The posters on his wall, athletes frozen in moments of glory, looked different now. Where they once inspired him, they now seemed distant, unreachable, almost mocking. He pulled the blanket over his head, trying to hide from their stares. But the darkness under the blanket only gave him more space to wrestle with his thoughts. Why not me? The question looped endlessly in his mind. He replayed practices in his head. Every shot, every sprint, every bead of sweat he had shed. Hadn't he done enough? Or maybe the truth was harsher. Maybe he wasn't as good as he thought he was. The thought broke him again, and fresh tears slid down his cheeks. He pressed the basketball, which he had pulled onto the bed with him, against his chest. It was a comfort and a curse all at once. The thing he loved most, the thing that had betrayed him. His fingers traced the grooves, gripping tighter, as though holding on might keep the dream from slipping away completely. Time passed strangely. Minutes felt like hours. Outside his window, the sun finally dipped, leaving the room in shadow. He listened to the muffled laughter of his siblings downstairs, the clatter of forks against plates, his parents' voices drifting through the floorboards. The world continued on, indifferent to his heartbreak. He thought about staying in that room forever, about giving up on the game that had broken his heart. But then, in the quiet, another thought crept in. Quitting would make the pain permanent. If he gave up now, the rejection would define him forever. He wiped his face again, sitting up slowly. His body felt heavy, drained, but his mind began to sharpen. He remembered moments when his father pushed him to keep going, to not let a bad day win. He remembered his mother telling him that tears were fine, but they were never the ending. He thought of his older brother Larry, stronger, faster, always a step ahead. Maybe this was his chance to prove not just to the world, but to himself, that he could catch up. Michael stood, ball still in hand, and walked to the mirror. His eyes were swollen, red from crying, but somewhere inside them flickered a different kind of fire, a quiet defiance. He stared at his own reflection, gripping the ball tighter. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself, his voice low but steady. The tears hadn't been weakness. They had been release. Behind closed doors, alone with his pain, Michael Jordan made a choice. He would not let rejection be the last word. He would turn it into the beginning of something greater. That night, when the rest of the family finally went to bed, he slipped quietly out the back door. The ball bounced softly against the driveway as he dribbled under the pale moonlight. Each bounce echoed his promise. Each shot carried his vow. The world would not remember him as the boy who didn't make the team. They would remember him as the man who turned rejection into destiny. Behind closed doors, his tears had carved out space for resilience. And resilience, as the world would one day learn, was a foundation of greatness. The morning after rejection was always the hardest. The sunlight crept into Michael's room like an uninvited guest, spilling across the floor, touching the basketball that had rolled from his bed to the carpet. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his body heavy with the weight of yesterday's failure. Every blink brought back the image of the roster list, each name sharp as a knife, each letter reminding him that his wasn't there. He dragged himself out of bed, rubbing at eyes still swollen from crying. The smell of breakfast drifted from the kitchen, eggs sizzling, toast browning, but he wasn't hungry. His appetite had been replaced by something else, something raw and restless. He grabbed the basketball, the leather rough beneath his fingertips, and held it close. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he knew one thing. He couldn't just sit in the shadow of rejection. Outside, the world was alive with ordinary sounds. Cars hummed along the street. Birds called out from branches. Neighbors raked leaves into piles. To Michael, it all felt muted, like the world was on a different frequency. His own was darker, sharper, tinged with fire. He walked to the backyard, bouncing the ball against the cracked concrete. The sound was familiar, grounding. Each bounce was like a heartbeat, steadying him, reminding him who he was. At first, he shot casually, almost lazily, the ball slipping through the net or bouncing away. But with each miss, the frustration rose. He heard the laughter of the boys in the gym replay in his head. He saw the names on the list again. He heard the voice of doubt whispering, "Not good enough, not tall enough, not ready." His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared. His casual shots turned into drills, his body moving with urgency. Sweat formed quickly on his forehead, trickling down his temples. He drove the hoop over and over, imagining defenders taller, stronger, trying to stop him. He spun, he jumped, he shot, he missed, he tried again. Each failure in practice didn't crush him. It fueled him. The pain of rejection became energy, a stubborn refusal to be defined by one coach's decision. His mother stepped out onto the back porch, arms folded, watching quietly. She saw the fire in his movements, the desperation in the way he played alone. She didn't interrupt. She knew that what was happening out there wasn't just basketball. It was transformation. Hour after hour, Michael pushed himself harder. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but he didn't stop. Every shot was a conversation with his pain. You said I wasn't enough? Watch this. You think I can't? Watch me. By late afternoon, his shirt was soaked, his shoes caked in dust. His hands stung from the ball, raw from repetition. Still, he stayed out there. As the sky shifted from blue to amber, he sank one final shot, the ball swishing clean through the net. He stood there, breathing hard, chest heaving, staring at the hoop like it was an opponent he had just promised to conquer. That night, as he collapsed into bed, exhaustion blanketing his body, something had changed. The pain was still there, but it had been reshaped, reforged into something sharper. No longer was rejection just a wound, it was a weapon. He realized that failure wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his fire. In the stillness of the dark, Michael whispered to himself, "This isn't going to break me, it's going to make me." And with that vow, the boy who had been cut from his high school team began to transform rejection into relentless motivation. The court became his sanctuary. Day after day, Michael returned to the cracked driveway, to the echo of the basketball against concrete, to the lonely sound of his own footsteps chasing the ball, while other kids from the neighborhood played video games, hung out at the park, or lingered lazily on porches. He practiced, not once or twice a week, every single day. The early mornings were quiet, still heavy with dew. Michael would slip outside with his basketball, while the world was still waking. The rim in the driveway rattled with each shot, shaking like it might collapse under the weight of his determination. The sound of the net, the bounce of the ball, the rhythm of his dribbling, they were his music. He worked on everything. Layups from both sides of the hoop, jump shots from impossible angles, free throws until his arms ached. He ran back and forth, pretending defenders closing on him, spinning away from ghosts only he could see. His imagination filled the silence. Every shadow on the driveway became a rival, every breeze a defender trying to block his shot. His body hurt. His legs burned from constant sprints. His lungs begged for rest. His hands were rubbed raw from the ball's rough texture. But pain no longer scared him. Pain had become proof that he was pushing further than the boy who had been cut. Proof that he was building something no one could deny. Neighbors sometimes peeked over the fence, shaking their heads in disbelief. "That Jordan kid is out there again," they'd whisper. His parents, watching from the window, understood. They knew the rejection had carved deep, but they also saw how it had transformed their son. The boy who had once wept behind closed doors was now a young man grinding in plain sight, every drop of sweat a declaration. I will not be ignored. Even the nights belonged to practice. Streetlights flickered to life, and while most homes glowed with the soft light of televisions, Michael stayed outside. The cool night air wrapped around him, but it didn't slow him down. His breath puffed out in clouds as he dribbled, shot, chased, repeated. Mississippi, Mississippi make. Mississippi make. The rhythm was endless, hypnotic. Some nights, he played until his mother opened the door, calling him back inside. "Michael, it's midnight. Enough now." But he'd plead for just one more round, one more shot, one more chance to prove to himself that the pain had purpose. Often, she let him stay, because she knew this wasn't just about basketball. This was about building a soul that refused to quit. The endless hours of practice weren't glamorous. There were no crowds, no cheerleaders, no trophies. Just a boy, a ball, and a hoop that barely held together. But greatness doesn't bloom in the spotlight. It grows in the dark, in silence, in sacrifice. As the months passed, the change became visible. His shot grew smoother, his footwork quicker, his endurance stronger. He wasn't just practicing, he was transforming. With each hour, the gap between who he had been and who he was becoming widened. One night, drenched in sweat, Michael leaned against the fence, chest heaving, eyes locked on the hoop. The stars shimmered above, cold and distant, but he didn't feel small. He felt alive. He realized then that rejection hadn't buried him. It had planted him. And now, with every endless hour of practice, he was beginning to rise. The boy who once cried behind closed doors was no longer broken. He was building himself into someone unstoppable. The morning stopped belonging to sleep. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., and Michael no longer groaned or begged for 5 more minutes. Instead, he jumped out of bed, laced up his shoes, and greeted the day with the sound of bouncing basketball. What had once felt like punishment, early hours, aching muscles, the sting of missing shots, was becoming routine. Discipline was no longer something he forced on himself. It was the air he breathed. Each day became a test. Before school, while other kids dragged themselves out of bed, Michael was already drenched in sweat. The sun hadn't risen fully, and yet he had already taken hundreds of shots. His father's old words echoed in his mind. "Don't tell me about your dreams. Show me your work." And Michael showed it, not by boasting, not by promises, but by repetition. Over and over, he drilled the basics until it became second nature. The discipline wasn't just about practice. It spilled into everything. His diet changed. He thought about how every bite would affect his energy. His study habits improved. If he could focus on basketball drills for hours, why couldn't he do the same with books? His attitude sharpened. Excuses no longer had space in his vocabulary. Each day, his rejection turned into resolve, and his resolve into habit. Teachers noticed a difference. Friends noticed a difference. His family saw it most. Gone was the boy who sulked after being cut from team. In his place stood a teenager whose eyes carried a quiet fire, whose voice carried certainty, whose steps carried purpose. He wasn't simply playing basketball anymore. He was teaching himself how to live with intention. The driveway, the gym, the schoolyard all became classrooms. Every miss was a lesson. Every correction a victory. Every beat of sweat a reminder that discipline was building something inside him that no coach's decision could erase. But discipline is not glamorous. It doesn't shout or cheer. It whispers. Again, when his arms burned, discipline said, "One more rep." When the cold winter mornings made him want to stay in bed, discipline said, "Get up." When loneliness crept in, when no one clapped, when no one praised, discipline reminded him that greatness doesn't need applause, it needs persistence. Michael learned to silence doubt with routine. He didn't wonder anymore if he could become great. He trusted that his daily work was carrying him there, step by step. Each swish of the net was a reminder that consistency mattered more than talent. And every time his body screamed to stop, he answered with movement, because he knew quitting once would make quitting easier the next time. This wasn't just basketball anymore. This was character. This was discipline weaving itself into his DNA. Years later, people would marvel at his focus, his ability to rise to the moment when the game was on the line. They'd call it talent. They'd call it genius. But here, in these early mornings and long nights, it wasn't talent. It wasn't genius. It was discipline, built one day, one choice, one repetition at a time. In the quiet of his driveway, under the glow of the streetlight, Michael whispered to himself, "They'll never outwork me. Not today. Not ever." And with that, he bent his knees, lifted the ball, and let it fly. Swish. Discipline rewarded him again. The nights belonged to his dreams now. After long hours of practice, sweat still drying on his skin, Michael would lie in bed, exhausted but restless. His body craved rest, but his mind played games of its own. In his imagination, the high school gym was packed with fans, the lights glaring, the scoreboard tight. The ball was in his hands. The same coach who once told him he wasn't good enough now sat on the bench, watching, waiting. The crowd roared. Michael rose, released, and the ball swished through the net. Victory. Redemption. These dreams weren't fantasies meant to comfort him. They were fuel. Each night, he lived inside a world where the sting of rejection had been erased, replaced by triumph. And each morning, when the alarm rang, he chased those visions with renewed hunger. The dreams were more than entertainment. They were blueprints. They whispered, "This is possible. This can be real." Sometimes the dreams turned into nightmares. In them, he would miss a shot. The crowd would laugh. The coach would shake his head again, telling him he didn't belong. Michael would wake up gasping, heart pounding, sweat soaking his shirt. The rejection had followed him into his sleep. But even those nightmares carried purpose. They reminded him that failure wasn't something to run from. It was something to face head-on. One evening, after another grueling practice, Michael sat on the porch, the ball resting against his knees. His father joined him, silent for a while, before saying, "You can't let them define you, Mike. You get to define you." Those words cut deep, because that was what the dreams were teaching him, that the story wasn't over, that he held the pen. At school, whispers followed him. "That's the kid who got cut." But Michael no longer bowed his head. He looked those whispers in the eye, knowing they were temporary. Redemption wasn't about silencing others. It was about proving something to himself. And every layup, every shot, every sprint pushed him closer to the boy he saw in his dreams. He taped notes to his wall. "Never give up. Work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard." Prove them wrong. They weren't decorations. They were reminders. Each night before bed, he read them aloud, imprinting them into his mind until they became his personal gospel. One dream returned often. Him standing on the varsity court, jersey sticking to his back, fans chanting his name. In the dream, he wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was ready. The boy who once felt invisible was now the center of everything. That dream became his North Star. Redemption, he realized, wasn't a single moment. It wasn't one shot or one game. Redemption was a slow, relentless process of transformation. The quiet nights of sweat, the lonely mornings of work, the days when no one believed but him. That was redemption, choosing to rise every time rejection tried to bury him. So he kept dreaming, he kept believing, and he kept moving. Because deep down, Michael knew something powerful. The day would come when those dreams weren't dreams anymore. They would be reality. And when that day arrived, he wouldn't just play for the crowd or the coach or even the scoreboard. He would play for the boy who once stood in a gymnasium, heartbroken, told he wasn't enough. He would play for redemption. The court was silent at dawn, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. Michael liked it that way. No crowd, no coaches, no teammates, just him and the echo of a basketball against the hardwood. These silent mornings became his proving grounds. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. What he needed was a rhythm of work, the sound of effort stacking brick by brick into something unshakable. He arrived before the janitors turned the key in the school doors. Sometimes he'd sneak into the side gym entrance, propping it open the night before the pebble, so he could slip in unnoticed. The gym smelled faintly of dust and polish, the kind of scent that told stories 100 games, 100 dreams, 100 heartbreaks. To most, it was just a building. To Michael, it was a battlefield, and every dribble, every shot, every sprint was a declaration of war. There was no one to tell him he was doing well, no one to point out mistakes, no scoreboard flashing victory or defeat. The only measure was his own willpower. Alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights, he crafted a secret vow. When the lights are bright and the crowd is loud, I'll already be prepared, because I've been winning here in the silence. The silence was brutal. There were days when his legs felt like concrete, when his arms shook after every shot. His stomach growled, because he had skipped breakfast just to be there early. But in that silence, Michael discovered a truth. Growth didn't happen when people were watching. Growth happened in the shadows, where discipline was the only witness. Sometimes he would pause, leaning on his knees, sweat dripping onto the floor. The gym echoed with nothing but his breath. In those moments, doubt whispered, "Why are you doing this? No one cares. You'll never make it." He would clench his jaw, stare at the rim, and answer not with words but with action. Another shot, another sprint, another drill. Silence became both enemy and ally. It exposed his doubts, but also gave him the space to crush them. On weekends, when his friends hung out, Michael was still in the gym. He missed parties, movies, lazy afternoons. He traded teenage fun for repetition, monotony, and pain. People didn't understand. They thought he was obsessed. Maybe he was. But obsession was the price of transformation, and he was willing to pay it. He kept track of his progress with chalk marks on the wall. For every practice, a line. The wall filled slowly, week after week, until it became a mural of persistence. Each mark was proof that he had shown up, even when it was hard, even when no one else did. One night, while shooting in the empty gym, he looked at his reflection in the darkened window. He barely recognized himself, sweat-soaked, tired, eyes burning with fire. The boy who had once walked home in tears after being cut from the team had been replaced by someone else. Someone sharper, hungrier, stronger. Silence had carved him into a different person. And yet, he knew this was just the beginning. These silent proving grounds weren't just about making the team. They were about forging a mindset that whispered, "Work in silence. Let success make the noise." He smiled faintly, grabbed the ball again, and launched another shot. The echo filled the gym, and in that echo, he heard his future calling. Because in the silence, Michael Jordan was building a legend. There are moments in life when a single flame can change everything. For Michael, that flame wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a coach praising him or a sudden victory on the court. It was something small, something quiet, yet it burned with the force of destiny. It was the spark within. Late one evening, after hours of shooting alone, Michael sat on the bleachers. His body was drained, sweat dripping down his neck, arms trembling from exhaustion. He felt like giving up. He thought of his friends who were probably laughing at the diner, enjoying life while he punished himself in an empty gym. His chest ached, not from the drills, but from the thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't meant to be great. But then he remembered that day, the rejection, the list with his name missing, the silence that followed when his dream was torn apart. That wound still lived inside him, but now it no longer bled. Instead, it glowed like an ember. That ember whispered, "Prove them wrong. Prove yourself right." He closed his eyes and pictured it. The crowd roaring, the spotlight shining, the rim trembling as the ball passed through again and again. He could feel the weight of the jersey, the pride of redemption. It wasn't real yet, but in his mind, it was as vivid as the sweat on his skin. That vision ignited him. From that night forward, he stopped practicing only to prove others wrong. He began to practice to prove himself right. His spark wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about belief. Belief that the rejection was not the end of his story, but the catalyst for something extraordinary. The next morning, he woke earlier than ever. He ran harder, pushed faster, shot until his fingers blistered. Pain no longer felt like an enemy. It became a sign he was alive, moving, growing. Every ache was fuel. Every mistake was a lesson. Every hour in the gym was an investment in the future he saw so clearly in his mind. Sometimes his mother would worry. She would watch him leave before sunrise, return after sunset, his eyes heavy yet burning with determination. She knew he was chasing something invisible to everyone else. But she didn't stop him. She knew some fires can't be extinguished, they can only grow. At school, people noticed a change. He was quieter, more focused. He didn't laugh as much in hallways. He wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was becoming something else, someone forged by discipline. Teachers noticed his tired eyes. Teammates noticed his sharper moves. But no one truly understood what was happening inside him. One night, alone in his room, Michael wrote in a notebook. Not plays, not stats, just words. Words like hunger, fight, rise, believe. He scribbled them over and over, as if writing them down would tattoo them on his soul. That notebook became his secret fuel. Whenever doubt crept in, he opened it and reminded himself of who he was becoming. The spark within him grew every day. It wasn't about making the varsity team anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about becoming unstoppable. It was about refusing to live a life of what if. And as he stood in front of the mirror one evening, sweat soaking through his shirt, chest heaving after hours of drills, he whispered to himself, "They don't see it yet, but I do. I know who I am becoming." That whisper was more powerful than any cheer. That spark was brighter than any spotlight. And though the world hadn't yet noticed, a firestorm was coming. Because deep within Michael Jordan, the flame of greatness had already been lit. Greatness never comes in a straight line. Even when the spark was burning inside Michael, there were nights when shadows seemed stronger than the fire. The wall of doubt wasn't built by bricks or concrete. It was built by whispers, fears, and the heavy silence that followed every missed shot. It began with fatigue. He was pushing himself harder than ever, running until his lungs screamed, shooting until his fingers went numb. Some mornings, his body felt like it belonged to someone twice his age. He dragged himself out of bed, not because he wanted to, but because the voice inside wouldn't let him rest. Still, as his body weakened, doubt found cracks to creep in. What if I'm not enough? What if I'll always be that kid who didn't make the team? What if all this pain is for nothing? He didn't share these thoughts with anyone. Not his mother, not his brothers, not even his closest friends. On the outside, he was the same determined Michael. On the inside, a storm brewed. One afternoon, during a scrimmage with older players in the neighborhood, the wall of doubt grew higher. He was outmatched, pushed around, blocked, humiliated. They laughed when he missed an easy layup. One of them even said, "Man, you'll never make it if you keep playing like that." Those words struck deeper than any elbow. That night, he skipped dinner and sat in the dark of his room. He stared at the ceiling, feeling like a failure. He wanted to scream, to punch through the wall, to break the cycle of rejection replaying in his head. Instead, he sat in silence, the doubt pressing heavier and heavier, suffocating the flame inside. But sometimes, life sends reminders in the quietest ways. His mother knocked gently on the door, leaving a plate of food on the desk without saying a word. She knew her son was battling something bigger than basketball. She didn't need to lecture him. Her quiet presence was enough to remind him, "You're not alone." Later that night, Michael pulled out his secret notebook. His eyes fell on the words he had scribbled before. Hunger, fight, rise, believe. For a moment, they felt meaningless, just ink on paper. But as he read them again and again, they started to echo inside him, louder than the whispers of doubt. He realized the wall of doubt wasn't meant to stop him. It was meant to test him. Every block, every insult, every night of questioning, this was part of the journey. A wall wasn't the end. It was a challenge to climb. The next morning, he returned to the gym. His legs still felt heavy. His heart still carried doubt. But he pushed through. For every missed shot, he took 5 more. For every mistake, he worked until he corrected it. And though the wall of doubt stood tall in front of him, each drop of sweat, each hour of practice, was another brick he tore down. Some days he won. Some days he lost. But every day he fought. And that fight, invisible to the world, was shaping him more than any victory ever could. The wall of doubt would not be the end of Michael Jordan. It would be the reason he learned how to rise above. The breakthrough didn't arrive like a lightning strike. It didn't come with roaring applause or a coach shouting his name across the gym. No, it came in the quiet, in the steady rhythm of repetition, in the unnoticed hours that no one else cared about. Michael had been chipping away at his wall of doubt day by day. The gym had become more than a place to train. It was his battlefield, his church, his confessional. The squeak of sneakers on the floor, the thud of the ball echoing off the hardwood, the swish of the net, all of it formed a symphony that carried him beyond his fear. Then one morning, something changed. He was running drills, as always, drenched in sweat before the sun had even climbed high. His body wanted to quit, but his heart was louder. He rose for a jump shot, released the ball, and it kissed the net perfectly. Then another. A rhythm formed. 10 in a row, 20, 30. He wasn't thinking anymore. His body, once clumsy, was moving like it belonged to the game. He paused, chest heaving, eyes wide. For the first time, he felt it. Not just effort, not just desire, but flow. The game was no longer resisting him. It was embracing him. The ball felt like an extension of his hand, the rim like a destination already chosen. Later that week, during a neighborhood game, the breakthrough showed itself again. Older players who once shoved him aside now struggled to keep up. He cut through defenders with speed, rose higher than anyone expected, and when he dunked, clean, powerful, undeniable. The court went silent for a moment before erupting. Michael didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, as if saying to himself, "This is what I've been working for." But the real breakthrough wasn't the dunk. It was a feeling deep inside that the boy who was once rejected was no longer the same boy. He wasn't just playing basketball. He was transforming into something else. That night, back in his room, he sat with his notebook again. He wrote new words this time. Trust the work. It wasn't about proving the coach wrong anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about the discovery that greatness comes when you surrender to the grind, when you keep going long after others stop. His mother noticed the change too. She saw the glow in his eyes, the unshakable calm in his step. "Michael," she said softly one evening, "whatever happens tomorrow, don't forget you already won. You already beat the hardest part." The breakthrough wasn't a finish line. It was a doorway. And now, Michael was ready to walk through it. Confidence doesn't arrive overnight. It creeps in slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. For Michael, the glow began the moment he realized his hours in the gym were reshaping him. Not just his body, but his spirit. At practice, he no longer looked down when he entered the gym. He no longer tucked himself into corners, avoiding the eyes of coaches and teammates. Instead, he walked with his shoulders back, his stride steady. There was something in his presence now, an unspoken force that said, "I belong here." It was visible in the way he played. Every crossover was sharper, every shot more confident. He attacked the rim with ferocity, not hesitation, where before he might have second-guessed himself. Now he trusted his instincts. His teammates started noticing too. "Yo, Mike's got fired today," one whispered. Another clapped him on the back after scrimmage, saying, "Man, you're different. What's going on?" The truth was simple. Michael had started believing in himself. The rejection that once burned like a scar had transformed into fuel. And with every game, with every drill, that fuel carried him higher. One afternoon, during a school scrimmage, something remarkable happened. The gym was buzzing with students, teachers, and parents who had wandered in to watch. Michael caught the ball on the wing. A defender stepped up, smirking as if to say, "I got you." But Michael didn't hesitate. He drove left, spun back right, and rose for a jumper that sailed cleanly through the net. The crowd gasped, then cheered. Moments later, he stole the ball, sprinted down the court, and finished with a layup that brought his teammates to their feet. He didn't hear the crowd this time. All he heard was the pounding of his own heartbeat, strong and steady, matching the rhythm of his newfound confidence. That night, his father noticed too. Sitting at the kitchen table, James Jordan looked at his son with pride. "Mike," he said, "I can see it now. You're not just working hard. You're starting to believe. That's the difference." Michael nodded silently, but inside, something unshakable had taken root. The boy who once trembled with doubt was gone. In his place was a young man who knew deep down that rejection was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of his rise. Confidence wasn't arrogance. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, unshakable. It was a knowledge that no matter what obstacle came next, he could face it. And for Michael, that realization was as important as any championship ring he would one day wear. Confidence had given Michael a new fire, but fire alone wasn't enough. He wanted to know, how far can I go? That question became his obsession. The gym was no longer just about practice. It was about testing the very edges of his endurance, pushing himself into places where most people would quit. He started with the basics. 500 shots a day, then 700, then 1,000. His hands grew raw, blisters rising and breaking, but he refused to tape them. He wanted to feel the pain. It reminded him that progress was real, running drills. He pushed himself harder than ever before. He wasn't satisfied with keeping up. He wanted to lap his teammates. Sprints up and down the court until his lungs screamed for air, until his vision blurred. When others collapsed on the floor, Michael kept going. His coach, watching from the sidelines, shook his head in disbelief. "That boy's insane," he muttered under his breath. But there was admiration in his eyes. Late nights became routine. While his friends slept, Michael was in the backyard, the faint light of a porch lamp illuminating the basket. Neighbors would sometimes peek out their windows, shaking their heads as they watched the ball thump against the pavement over and over again. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., it didn't matter. If Michael missed a shot, he wouldn't stop until he hit 10 perfect ones in a row. Testing the limits also meant confronting failure. Some days, his legs simply gave out. He would collapse on the floor, staring at the ceiling, sweat soaking through his clothes. Doubt would creep back in. Am I pushing too hard? Am I enough? But then he would remember that day, being cut from the team, standing on the outside while others celebrated. That memory was all the fuel he needed to drag himself back up. His family worried at times. His mother would say, "Michael, you need rest. You can't keep punishing yourself like this." But Michael would smile, wipe the sweat from his brow, and whisper, "Ma, this isn't punishment. This is who I am now." One evening, after hours of running suicides, Michael stood alone in the gym, chest heaving, legs trembling. He could have gone home. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he picked up the ball, looked at the rim, and said softly, "One more." Then another. Then another. Each repetition was a declaration. I will not stop. Not here. Not now. By testing his limits, Michael discovered something powerful. Limits weren't walls. They were doors. And every time he pushed past one, another opened, leading him closer to the player and the man he was destined to become. The real test of all those hours came when Michael finally stepped back onto the court, not just to practice, but to compete. Practice was safe. Practice was repetition. But competition? Competition was raw. It was chaos. It was a moment when the entire gym watched, when every mistake felt like a spotlight burning down on you. The gym was buzzing with anticipation. Students, teachers, and families crowded the bleachers. For Michael, this wasn't just another scrimmage. It was a proving ground. Every dribble, every shot, every defensive stance would be a statement to the world. I am not the boy who got cut. I am something more. When the whistle blew, adrenaline surged through his veins. The ball slapped against the court like a drumbeat, syncing with his pounding heart. Early in the game, he caught the ball at the top of the key. The defender smirked. He remembered Michael from the year before, the kid who wasn't good enough. Michael didn't hesitate. A quick crossover left, a spin back right, and he rose into a jumper that arced high and fell cleanly through the net. The crowd erupted. Every possession was a war. Michael dove for loose balls, sprinted back on defense, fought for rebounds against taller players. His jersey clung to his skin, soaked with sweat, but he kept pushing. The rejection from last season wasn't a memory anymore. It was a force driving every step, every leap. Then came the moment. The score was tied, seconds left on the clock. Michael had the ball. The gym was electric, every eye on him. The defender crouched low, waiting, daring him to try. Michael dribbled, heart hammering, then exploded forward. One dribble, two. Then he pulled up from the elbow. Time seemed to freeze as the ball floated through the air. Swish. The gym erupted into chaos. His teammates swarmed him, the crowd on their feet. For the first time, Michael wasn't just a player fighting for respect. He was the one delivering the win. But more important than the cheers, more important than the victory, was a feeling deep inside him. Standing there, sweat dripping, chest heaving, he realized something. This was just a beginning. The proving ground wasn't about proving it to others. It was about proving it to himself. And he had done it. Later that night, lying in bed, he replayed the moment in his mind. The defender's eyes, the ball leaving his hand, the sound of the net. He smiled to himself in the dark. The rejection had started his journey. But tonight, he had taken the first step toward rewriting his story. For months, Michael had been grinding in silence. Late nights, empty gyms, endless drills. He had lived in the shadows, where only his own echoes kept him company. But after the proving ground game, something new began to stir around him. Belief. It started small. A few teammates who once dismissed him now passed him the ball without hesitation. Teachers stopped him in the hallway with smiles. "Heard about that game, Michael. You're making a name for yourself." Even his coach, the same man who had once cut him, began watching him with a different expression. Less doubt, more curiosity. Michael could feel it. Belief was no longer just something he carried in his chest. It was spreading, seeping into the people around him. And with that belief came a new kind of pressure. Every practice, every game, people expected him to show up, to deliver. But rather than shrink from it, Michael embraced it. Pressure, he realized, was a privilege. One night after practice, his coach called him over. The gym was empty, the lights buzzing overhead. "Jordan," the coach said, his voice firm but softened before, "I cut you last year because I didn't think you were ready. But I'll tell you something. You've proven me wrong. You've got something, son. Don't lose it." Those words hit Michael harder than any rejection ever had. It wasn't full approval, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes acknowledgement is all a dreamer needs to ignite an inferno. That night, Michael sat on the steps of his house, the ball resting on his lap. He looked up at the stars, the cool night air filling his lungs, and whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. This is a spark." He felt a certainty growing inside him, stronger than ever before. The boy who had been cut was gone. The young man who believed in himself, and now had others believing too, was just beginning to rise. Belief, he realized, was contagious. And now that spark would burn brighter, lighting the path toward everything he had once thought impossible. The gym was empty again, just as it had been on so many lonely nights before. Only this time, Michael wasn't the same boy who once drowned in rejection. The wooden floor still echoed beneath his sneakers. The ball still thudded like a heartbeat against the court, but everything inside him had shifted. He no longer played just to escape the memory of being cut. He played because he had a vision of where he was going. Standing at half court, Michael stared at the rim, sweat rolling down his temple. His chest rose and fell, but he wasn't tired. He was alive. Every shot he took now wasn't just practice. It was preparation for a road that stretched far beyond the small-town gymnasium. He could feel it, like a destiny tugging him forward. In his quiet moments, he began to imagine more. The roar of larger crowds, the pressure of brighter lights, the battles against players who were faster, taller, stronger. Instead of being intimidated, he welcomed the thought. The road ahead would not be easy. It would be brutal, paved with sacrifice and pain. But wasn't that the point? Didn't greatness demand a price? His family noticed a change in him, too. At dinner, his father looked across the table and said, "Son, I see it in your eyes. You're chasing something bigger now." Michael just nodded, because words couldn't capture the fire burning inside. His mother, ever steady, ever protective, placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Just remember who you are, no matter how far you go." Those words would become his compass, guiding him long after. Back in the gym, Michael practiced late into the night, long after others had gone home. With every shot that swished through the net, he wasn't just perfecting a skill. He was laying bricks on the road ahead. Every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, was another step toward the dream that now consumed him. And yet, deep down, he knew the road wasn't about the destination alone. It was about the journey, the pain of rejection, the lessons of discipline, the spark of belief that had carried him here. Those moments weren't obstacles. They were foundations. Without them, he would not be ready for what was to come. As he sank one final jumper before packing up, Michael whispered into the empty gym, "This is only the beginning." His voice echoed back to him, almost like the gym itself believed him. Walking home under the streetlights, the ball tucked under his arm, he felt the weight of the future pressing down, not as a burden, but as a promise. The boy who was once told no was now chasing a lifetime of yes. The rejection that had once broken him had transformed into the road ahead, and Michael Jordan, the boy from Wilmington, was ready to walk it, step by step, shot by shot, dream by dream, until the world finally saw what he already knew. This wasn't just about basketball. It was about life, about resilience, about never letting someone else's judgment define your destiny. And as long as there was a ball in his hands, Michael Jordan would keep proving it. In Michael Jordan's story, there are powerful words and expressions that can help you improve your English while also inspiring your life. Rejection. This means being turned away, not accepted. Michael was rejected from his high school varsity basketball team. Instead of giving up, he turned rejection into motivation. Resilience. The ability to bounce back after failure. Michael showed resilience by practicing harder after being cut, Fuel the fire, a phrase meaning to add more energy or passion to something. Every no from the world only fueled the fire inside Michael. Defining moment, a moment that changes your future. For Michael, the day he didn't make the team became his defining moment. Destiny, what you are meant to become. Michael believed his destiny was bigger than rejection. By learning these words in the context of his journey, you don't just grow your English, you grow your mindset. Turn pain into power. When life rejects you, let it fuel the fire inside you instead of putting it out. Commit to the unseen hours. Greatness is built in empty gyms, late nights, and moments no one else is watching. Believe beyond rejection. Someone's no doesn't define your destiny. You do. Embrace resilience. Failure is not the end. It is a foundation for your future success. Keep walking the road ahead. Success is not a single moment. It's a journey of persistence, discipline, and belief. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Jordan's story reminds us of something eternal. Rejection is not the enemy. It is the invitation. It is life's way of asking, how badly do you want it? The boy who once cried in his room after being cut from the team became the man who redefined basketball forever. And so I leave you with this. When the world tells you you're not enough, look in the mirror, pick up your ball, your dream, your vision, and whisper back, this is only the beginning. Because the rejection that breaks you today can be the road that builds you tomorrow.